With the narrative television, adapting that to this region is also challenging because a lot of comedy is based on sexual innuendo, and so adapting that here is also challenging because of the conservative.
I'm not a big fan of that. The Office, the British show, was adapted all over the world. In France, they did an adaptation where all the boss does is hit on people, and it's very French, I guess. But I was like, that doesn't seem like that's the whole point of the show. But
did it work?
I don't know if it worked.
Yeah,
it didn't work for me.
Didn't know you mean like that. I just didn't know if the French Office was successful.
I think the French, what
the French, they like.
Yeah, what they took out of it was, a powerful man. He's gonna act like that.
But we really don't like that, like as just stories. I mean, not that we don't like it. We just don't go to it. It's like a cheap way to get a laugh, or a cheap way to get a reaction. It's an easier way. And one of the things that Greg does in all of his work is he builds an architecture around a joke. He goes down and builds the basement, then he adds the first floor, and then by the time you get to the penthouse, you're rolling laughing because he's architected this whole, process around this individual's mistake or choice or whatever it is.
So the answer is it's more challenging, but it's doable.
But also, totally. And also I think humor. You look around at different countries. Like I don't know if you've traveled in South America, bought a lot of formats there. The humor that's in, for example, Mexico on television that we get in Los Angeles is
feels absurd.
A very different type of humor. Yeah, it's it's a lot of older men and younger women and weird sounds and guys in chicken suits. It's just like a very
pies. Yeah.
Comedy is probably one of the most challenging things to adapt because it's very specific to culture.
Physical comedy, like Jerry Lewis, is always the example. As universal. And that's why the Jim Carrey movies, when they, that first wave of them, things like The Mask and
Ace Ventura.
Yeah, exactly. They traveled, and throw some animals in it, and it starts to play. But I agree, it is a harder exportable concept because it's so specific and also inside jokes. You're making one joke about your local football player and our joke around the guy who took steroids, who's the athlete or the one who crashed his car, whatever that thing is. It's got specificity is where comedy really, I personally believe, becomes the most successful.
There's a quote you said yesterday that was about specificity and being universal.
I'm not sure where that came from. I use it all the time. I think it might have been Tolstoy or some kind of old Russian novelist. But He's
giving away his Harvard education.
The idea being that if you're very truthful and specific in your own circumstances, it has value and it becomes universal, and people will find it interesting.
See, and I really agreed and resonated with me when you said that. And I think someone was talking about how that might not work because when you're specific to a place like the UAE, then it's harder to make something travel. That was a discussion that happened after you said that.
Yeah.
And I think those were two different things that that person was looking at, and it is because that is another challenge is getting things out and making it relatable because our culture is different than other cultures, even though in the region, these countries are closer together. But that's a challenge.
I think there's two boxes.
Yes.
There's the box around, okay, we've built this really great idea, let's remake it somewhere. And then there's the box of let's build a global show that can play everywhere in the world. And I think those are the rhythms that a smaller market needs to really amplify. In the United States, we have the luxury of having a market the size of the whole region here, and a shared, identity. And so that although diverse, red state, blue state, as we were living through an election cycle, but all of that, I think gives us an advantage, as American storytellers to go global. Plus the premium investment you get to do when you have a market of 300 million people as your primary market also enables you to spend more money and amplify the look and feel of something and go for something that potentially has, global elements. And within our own culture, just like in the UAE though, I am amazed at the diversity of the culture within the UAE,
Yeah.
and America is an extraordinarily diverse place. And where's Mindy Kaling from?
Massachusetts.
But what's her background? Like the Diwali episode.
Oh, I think she's
Sri
Tamil, maybe. She's Indian.
Okay,
but,
so South Asian,
Yeah.
and then Daryl, who was played by Craig Robinson, who's black, and we had a great Latin actor.
So you have all that diversity.
It's within the market,
Yeah.
So then suddenly, as you export it, people are relating to those characters.
But I would draw a distinction between an export business and your culture,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be seen by anybody outside the UAE for it to be a valuable part of your home culture. And as long as you keep the costs pretty low
Yeah.
on a homegrown
There lies the
television.
challenge.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at YouTube, for example,
Right.
and people are making stuff with their phones that is very engaging to lots and lots of other people. And
Yeah.
so
And there's plenty of YouTubers and people who make webisodes here, and
Yeah.
that, the challenge is getting higher quality productions on television.
Yeah.
And but there have been movements, and we're happy to be part of a lot of these accomplishments recently.
Well, I think what I think is so interesting is when people find a great idea for something that can be entertaining and also cheap, like the Blair Witch Project. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
As soon as that,
Paranormal,
they come out and you go, oh, okay. Well, the whole point of this is that it was all shot on somebody's phone, and it takes maybe more creativity from the writing standpoint to be able to
Continue
do
to
that. But once you
execute,
get
right.
that idea,
invent against the limitation.
yeah,
Right,
once
right.
you get that idea, it can be great and
Yeah.
and cheap.
Yeah, another thing that's a little different here is when with television shows, whether they're comedies or dramas, there's usually a single writer or maybe a partnership versus like a writer's room and a showrunner. What benefits would a system of showrunning and writer's room add to the region?
There's that, and then there's also where you get the material. Like you should talk about the Bill O'Reilly and how you built Killing Kennedy or some of those shows, because you started with a
Exactly.
book and a novelist, and then
Exactly. I mean, there's so many different ways to source material, and that material can, whether it's in the Bill O'Reilly instance, I went into National Geographic Channel, and my friend George Freeman from William Morris said, I represent Bill O'Reilly. He's got a great book. It hasn't come out yet. It's called Killing Lincoln. And I said, I'll take it. I was going in, Killing Lincoln. There's the assassination of Abraham Lincoln is is something in America that never, and this is before the Spielberg movie on Lincoln was coming out. It was coming out, but there's a year before it did. And in that instance, we went and attracted a great writer who then needed help to bring it to reality. National Geographic had a very specific take, which is they wanted it to be historically real. I was telling the story last night, whereas the Office writers wanted Greg Daniels to be inventive and just use The Office as a starting point. Bill O'Reilly was pretty open, but the National Geographic Society said, we want this to be authentic to the bone. In that instance, our writing room were a group of historians from Washington, D.C. Jay Winnick, who's one of the great historical writers in the world. And so it just really is so specific as it relates to what the content is and what the mission of your underwriter is.
but also the volume. So the volume of episodes.
Right,
If
and that,
you're
I'm sorry,
making-
right, that's one movie.
But if
Yeah.
you're making 25 episodes, you need a writer's room.
Well,
If it-
I would also, yeah. I mean, this is for sure true. But I would say that the notion of having a group of comedy writers writing for someone predates television in the United States. And I'm not exactly sure where it started. Vaudeville, perhaps, or stand-up comedians who would, buy jokes from other people. But by the time we had entertainment shows on radio, there were already bunches of writers writing the material. And when you think about radio, the production costs are so small for radio that it maybe made sense to spend the money on the writers, and it made it more about the ideas and the wit and what they were saying, about society. And perhaps there is a format here where instead of spending money on sets and costumes, it's
Content.
yeah, it's content, maybe like The Daily Show or something like that, where the set's very simple. You could shoot it here, but what's he saying? And now you get 10 great local writers to.
And in the adaptation, even of Killing, the first time Lincoln was one movie, Killing Kennedy was another. By the time we got to Killing Jesus, we did a miniseries. And even then, Waylon Green was the sole writer. He just did 4 hours of TV. Whereas Greg and Ben, when they're looking at Betty or they're looking at The Office or they're looking at another, they are contingent on creating something that could last for 7 seasons or for hundreds of episodes. That requires a level of creative, collaboration that doesn't exist when you're making a movie.
In England, which has as high a quality of creative storytelling as anywhere in the world, has a lot of single writers driving projects. So it shouldn't be viewed as a limitation. Michael Hurst, who was our partner on The Tudors, wrote every single word of every single episode, over 40 episodes of television on that show. Yeah. And there was no writer's room. And there are many examples in England. Now
But you also, if you think about something like Monty Python, or the Goon Show, or some of the comedy things, it helps to have
a staff and people that run the ideas.
Comedy, I think, is more reliant on a room because you get to test out jokes with each other. When you're around people, you're more funny.
And a lot of those people were also performers, not just writers, and that became something that Greg did brilliantly on The Office. Is B.J. Novak, Mindy Kaling were in the writers' room and on camera.
Right. I mean, I don't need to bring it back to The Office every
but
time we talk.
But we like most important
we
job,
like
most
it.
important job.
But I mean, I'm just saying, from the standpoint of local television here. And
that was a cheap show to produce.
The Office was pretty cheap, yeah. And but I got to think that The Daily Show is even cheaper than The Office. And
they have a lot of writers.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just a question of where are you going to look to invest? Or I think a lot of people have invested in production facilities and stages and post-production facilities with editing rooms and special effects, but the pre-production facilities, in terms of the writing training, is also important, especially on certain types of shows like comedies or pretty much comedies.
Well, I know that you guys have a limited amount of time to be here, so if you guys each want to say one of your most important words of wisdom to people who are watching this about creating content for television and the challenges that we've talked about.
I mean, I would this is a little nuanced thing, but the audience for creators, I would say these guys have the scripted part covered. I would say I learned a little thing in the unscripted world a while ago that I hired a gifted producer to produce my 6th season of Nashville Star, which is a story about country music, and it's a beautiful franchise that Ben and I built. It celebrates culture and creativity and people who are multifaceted artists, right? That show did not exist on TV. Miranda Lambert, season 1, wrote her songs, played her own guitar, had this voice of an angel, that kind of, you didn't see a lot of that on TV. When we went to NBC, I hired a new showrunner, and she did not love country music. And it was like, and by the way, it's late in my career to learn that, but in unscripted TV, that you need to, in some way, honor your subject. And if you don't like your subject, or if you don't have kind of a, if you don't have a belief in, kind of an aspirational belief in that filming of that subject, it is very hard to make it successful. I don't know if that helps you make sense or not.
Totally makes sense.
You got to write what you know, or produce what you know, or produce what you love.
Because when she made Jersey Shore, she nailed it. She came out of Long Island. She's a great producer, but with the country folk, it wasn't.
Her heart wasn't in that.
It wasn't that her heart wasn't in it. I don't think she would to this day say she didn't kind of connect with them on a way, and you need to connect with your subject.
Yeah.
And I think one thing, specific to your audience is be informed by global storytelling and what's going on in the world, so that you can see the shows in the rest of the world that may be doing great and have influence, but make sure you're bringing your own point of view to it and your own perspective as you're creating something, because we are constantly looking for innovation. Everybody wants to know what's next. And there is a great power of possibility in this region to find what is next, because we haven't seen a lot come yet from this region into our market or to other markets. So from the export perspective, there's a great promise. I see a lot of costume dramas here. I see a lot of soap operas, here. And I think there's an opportunity to reinvent the format. I see a ton of talking heads on Arabic television, and to me, a lot of those talking heads are a little bit lecturing, and I don't want to be lectured to. I want to be in a dialogue. Yeah. And I think, unlocking that, especially for the youth, and finding ways to tap into a conversation and not just a one-way street is really interesting, and finding ways to experiment to create new formats born of your own culture will potentially unlock a real global opportunity for the marketplace.
Awesome. Thanks.
I was so prepared, and then I was listening to what they were saying. I guess I would say, if I had any piece of advice, is that it isn't such a magic art practiced by a few people. Everybody has creativity and something to say, and if you look at a classroom of school children, there's always a bunch of kids in there who are acting, love to perform. They're the funny kids in each classroom around the world. And there's plenty of people here who can do wonderful creative things, are already doing them. And I would say there really isn't that much to learn from other people. Just, believe in yourselves and do it and have fun with it.
Thanks.
I like that.
Thank you for watching, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for including
Thank you
us
so
in here.
much.
All I would say is, next time, please don't shut the air conditioning, because we're all sweating.
This is the UAE, and so you're
It's
right.
a little warm.
Yeah.
So until next time, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.